Khaloud here is a Sudanese political analyst, and she joins the program live. Khaloud, it is good to see you again. I wish it was under better circumstances. 2 years now. Give us a sense if we're any closer, in your view, to seeing a resolution to this horrific tragedy.
I think, unfortunately, the answer is no. What we have seen is that increasingly regional powers, particularly in the Arab region, have become very comfortable at simply managing the conflict. And we haven't seen any new ideas about putting the right leverage on the table to get the principal belligerents to come to peace talks. But the reality is that this is a war that started off between two factions of the military and the Sudanese security state, but has now metastasized to different groups and different tribes and different areas of the country. And that makes it infinitely more harder to think of a resolution that could hold.
We saw the Sudanese army take control of the capital back in March. The RSF has control of the presidential palace and the airport right now. What is the latest situation in Khartoum? What power does the RSF have and hold?
So very little. The Sudanese armed forces managed to push out the RSF from Khartoum, that is the southern part of the Tri-City area, as well as from large parts of Omdurman, which is to the west, in the western part of the Tri-City area, which means that the Sudanese army now has control of most of the capital and surrounding areas. This has led to something of a complacency about sending troops and reinforcements to the capital of North Darfur, Al-Fashir, which is to the west of the country, where the RSF is currently raising IDP camps to the ground and committing vast atrocities. And really what we're seeing with the Sudanese armed forces taking back the capital is a sort of a reconfiguration of the balance of power within the country. Sudanese armed forces has the center, and the rapid support forces is rapidly trying to take control of the entirety of the western part of the country. The concern here is that people still won't be able to go back to Khartoum because Khartoum is massively unsafe. There's no water, no electricity, no safety. And the army and its allied militias, some of which are jihadi groups, are undertaking summary executions and effectively killing off people they have suspected to have been working with the RSF. Meanwhile, they let the RSF simply walk out of Khartoum, a move that has led them to now go and reinforce the rest of their RSF troops in Al-Fashir, causing massive problems for civilians in Al-Fashir and surrounding areas.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what are the consequences? What have we seen since the Sudanese army took back control of Khartoum back in March? What has the impact been for civilians? I mean, you just laid out the struggle that's ensued since then. What does that mean for civilians on the ground?
Well, people have been trying to get back to some semblance of normalcy, those who live in the capital. The Sudanese armed forces have been encouraging people to come back to the capital, but really without anything to offer them whatsoever. And people working at the community level have tried to reinstall electricity, to get some of the water sort of stations pumping. But the rapid support forces is not just going to let Khartoum go to the army. They have shown that they're willing to, continue their fight against many civilians in Sudan, and they are using drones to attack power stations, to attack water stations, not just in Khartoum, but also the different cities around the capital that feed into the infrastructure in the capital. What this means is that it may not be safe, or it may not be a viable place to live for many people for some time, which of course is precisely the point. Elsewhere in Sudan, we're also seeing civilians very much suffer the brunt of this war, whether they're being targeted by one side or the other for reprisal or revenge attacks, or whether they are dealing with the vast humanitarian impact of this war. I mean, Sudan has the world's largest humanitarian crisis, the world's largest displacement crisis, the world's largest protection crisis, and the world's largest hunger crisis, all rolled into one. And the international community has been woefully inefficient and insufficient in its response.
And as we noted, the RSF seized control of a major displaced persons camp in North Darfur on Sunday. What more do we know about that?
So the RSF has taken over the Zmzm camp, which is the camp, if you remember, August of last year, the UN belatedly declared that famine had been taking place. Famine has certainly taken root there since then, and in other places in the North Darfur area as well. The RSF have also said that they've taken Abu Shok. And what's interesting about, it's also another IDP camp, what's interesting about the framing of the RSF is that it very much shows, I think, their genocidal intent. They have called these IDP camps, well-established, long-established IDP camps, military bases. They have said that effectively there are no innocents in these military bases, as they framed it, and that effectively everyone is fair game. And what this means is that we have seen vast numbers of people, up to 400, declared dead today by local groups. We have seen, main sort of really sort of main characters and main actors in the emergency response rooms and other mutual aid groups who have been, holding, bearing the flag really of the resistance to the RSF siege, have lost their lives, etc. And effectively, it's an extremely desperate situation that's taking place at a time when the world is looking elsewhere, when there isn't really the requisite attention on what's happening in Al-Fashir.
And we know that the RSF now has launched an attack on Al-Fashir, and Al-Fashir is the last major town in Darfur under Sudanese army control. What would be the significance of the RSF, if they were to eventually win over control of Al-Fashir?
So the main counter to the RSF in Al-Fashir is actually the joint forces. These are Darfuri militias and armed groups. The Sudanese armed forces doesn't have much of a huge army presence there. And it's because of these joint forces that Al-Fashir has not so far fallen to the RSF, because to these joint forces, the fight is existential. It's not just about a military victory. They know that their ethnic groups, their families, their communities will be targeted by the RSF should the RSF take over Al-Fashir. So we're looking at huge atrocity risks at the moment in Al-Fashir and surrounding areas. For the RSF, it's very clear. Having lost Khartoum in the central part of the country, they need to now take Al-Fashir and hold that entire western border of Sudan, which has access to Libya, Chad, and Central African republics, 3 countries which they deem to be quite friendly in terms of helping them get arms and supplies. And so this is really a tussle for the western border of Sudan, but again, one that is borne by the civilians of this part of the country. This war is not only taking place at the national, so at sort of the strategic level, but also at the local levels. And there are many militias allied to the RSF that are using this opportunity to settle scores with many communities in Al-Fashir and the surrounding areas. And this is why we will continue to see ethnically targeted killings by the RSF in this area.
And the sexual violence being committed as well, one would imagine largely underreported. What do we know about the scale of atrocities regarding women in particular?
Well, we know that sexual violence has been, the prevalence of sexual violence has been very high since the start of the war. The RSF in particular have been accused of, and there's lots of evidence and documentation of their crimes, of sexual gender-based crimes and conflict-related sexual violence meted out against women and girls, and in some cases, men and boys as well. Some of the age ranges that we've seen are very, very young children, some as infants under 1 year old, and some up to 80 years old as well. So there's a very indiscriminate here approach that is designed to humiliate, is designed to subjugate not just these women, but their communities as well. And this has been a tactic that has been used by the Sudanese security state for decades, and the RSF is certainly using it now. Local groups, national level women's rights groups like the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa, as well as Amnesty International, have released several reports that have led, for example, the UN rapporteur on conflict-related sexual violence to say that this war is being waged on the bodies of women and children. And because there is no consequence, indeed, there has been no consequence to any human rights abuses committed against anyone in Sudan for decades, we will continue to see these acts being perpetrated, which is why justice mechanisms and, sort of the end of impunity is going to be central to stemming the tide of all sorts of violence, including gender-based violence.